In November 1961, bombs detonated in the capital of Ghana just days before Queen Elizabeth II was scheduled to arrive. British politicians pleaded with her to cancel the tour. The Cold War was escalating, and the country's president was actively flirting with the Soviet bloc. But the young queen refused to back down. Instead, she walked straight into the political crossfire, armed with a very specific, carefully curated jewelry box. She packed a tiara smuggled out of revolutionary Russia in a simple leather bag, an imperial diamond carrying the heavy weight of the British Empire, and exquisite emeralds rescued from a high society scandal. Today, we are going behind the scenes of a royal visit where the future of the Commonwealth hung in the balance, and where the ultimate diplomatic weapon wasn't a political treaty, but a collection of historic diamonds and one unforgettable dance. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. In 1961, the world was deeply fractured by the Cold War, and the newly independent Republic of Ghana found itself right on the fault line. Formerly the British colony of the Gold Coast, the country was now led by President Kwame Nkrumah. He was a man with grand ambitions, and he had recently started looking towards the Soviet bloc. American intelligence at the time noted that while Nkrumah had not completely aligned with the Soviets, he was actively trying to balance between the superpowers, taking loans and making diplomatic visits to Moscow. But at home, discontent was brewing. And just as the capital city of Accra was preparing for a glittering, long-awaited royal tour, the tension shattered the festive mood. On November 4th, just 5 days before Queen Elizabeth was scheduled to arrive, 2 bombs went off in the city. One blast damaged a bronze statue of President Nkrumah outside the parliament, and the other struck a stand at Black Star Square, exactly where the Queen was supposed to attend a massive parade. Suddenly, a diplomatic journey turned into a high-stakes security crisis. Back in London, the government was in turmoil. Winston Churchill himself wrote a letter to Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, expressing his deep unease. He was worried not only about the Queen's physical safety, but also about the political optics of her visiting a leader who was actively imprisoning his political opponents without trial. The pressure to cancel was immense. So, how did the young monarch respond to this intense situation? According to a report published by Time magazine shortly after, the Queen's answer was absolute steel. She reportedly told her Prime Minister, "I am not a film star, I am the head of the Commonwealth, and I am paid to face any risks that may be involved." Now, it is worth noting that this is a journalist's retelling of a private conversation, rather than a verified official transcript. Still, I honestly admire how perfectly that quote captures the unwavering sense of duty that defined her entire life. Following the explosions, Commonwealth Secretary Duncan Sands was urgently dispatched to Ghana to personally recheck the route alongside President Nkrumah. After a thorough assessment, the British government made its final decision. On November 8th, Harold Macmillan stood before the House of Commons and announced that the security experts did not believe the bombs were aimed at the Queen. The government officially advised her to proceed with the trip. Canceling the visit was simply too risky for Britain's global standing. The Queen had already postponed a trip to Ghana in 1959 because she was expecting Prince Andrew. Withdrawing again at such a fragile moment could have dealt a devastating blow to the Commonwealth, and it might have pushed Ghana entirely into the waiting arms of the Soviet Union. Elizabeth accepted the government's advice, packed her most significant royal jewels, and prepared to board her flight into the unknown. But how exactly would a newly independent republic, navigating a complex political crisis, welcome its former monarch? When the royal aircraft finally touched down in Accra on November 9th, the tension of the previous days seemed to dissolve into a vibrant, overwhelming welcome. A 21-gun salute boomed across the tarmac, greeting Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Waiting for them was President Nkrumah, dressed in a crisp white suit, alongside an assembly of more than 100 traditional chiefs. The chiefs were shaded by giant velvet umbrellas, each accompanied by a linguist, as local custom dictated. A traditional priest even stepped forward to pour a tot of gin onto the earth as a libation to the gods. A local ritual intended to cleanse the area and ensure a safe visit for the royal guests. The following evening, the diplomatic program formally began with a grand state dinner hosted by the president at the Ambassador Hotel. For her first major evening appearance of the tour, Elizabeth needed to project stability and confidence. She was no longer Ghana's reigning monarch, but she had returned as head of the Commonwealth, meeting the leaders of a sovereign republic. Her choice was Queen Alexandra's Kokoshnik tiara, one of the most imposing diamond pieces in the royal collection. In photographs, it appears almost like a solid wall of diamonds. Created by Curated in 1888, the tiara consists of 61 graduated platinum bars, set with nearly 500 diamonds. It was presented to the future Queen Alexandra for her silver wedding anniversary, and its design followed her own very specific request. She wanted a jewel modeled on the traditional Russian headdress worn by her sister, Empress Marie Fyodorovna. Seen in Accra in 1961, that Russian connection produces a striking historical irony. Elizabeth had arrived amid British anxiety over Soviet influence in Africa, wearing a design associated with the vanished imperial court of Russia. This was certainly not a coded reference to Moscow. The world of the Romanovs and the Soviet Union represented entirely different Russias. But the visual coincidence is difficult to miss. The more persuasive diplomatic meaning lay in the sheer rank of the ensemble. Elizabeth did not arrive at Ghana's first state dinner in a restrained or secondary selection of jewels. The kokoshnik, the necklace, and the earrings belonged to the same level of royal dressing she had used for important diplomatic occasions in established European states. Comparable combinations had already appeared during her state visit to the Netherlands in 1958 and the French state visit of 1960. Ghana therefore received the full ceremonial splendor of the monarchy. The young republic was not treated as a lesser stage. To complement the tiara, the Queen wore the King George VI festoon necklace, commissioned by her late father for her in 1950. More than 100 diamonds were arranged in 3 graduated rows, creating a broad sweep of light across the neckline. With the rigid vertical bars of the kokoshnik above it, the effect was formidable. This was one of Elizabeth's most reliable, high diplomatic combinations. Yet the necklace also introduced a private element into the public image. It had come to her from the father, whose place she had inherited only 2 years after he gave it to her. By 1961, it had become part of the recognizable jewelry vocabulary of her reign, but its origin remained deeply personal. From her ears hung the Greville diamond chandelier earrings. The diamonds descend through a complicated arrangement of geometric forms before ending in pear-shaped drops, giving the earrings movement that the more architectural tiara and necklace do not possess. They had originally formed part of the famous Greville bequest to Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, and were presented to Princess Elizabeth by her parents as a wedding gift in 1947. She wore them regularly for galas and state visits during the early decades of her reign, so their appearance in Accra was not an experiment. They were part of a familiar, thoroughly tested formal ensemble, the kind of jewelry in which she already knew how to look and move with confidence. I also love the fact that these earrings have now entered another chapter of royal life. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has worn them at major evening engagements, and their strong Art Deco geometry looks as relevant on her as it did on Elizabeth in the 1960s. Perhaps the most personal element of the ensemble rested on the Queen's wrist, the geometric Art Deco Edinburgh wedding bracelet. Prince Philip had designed it as a wedding gift for his bride, using diamonds from a tiara that had belonged to his mother, Princess Alice. Wearing his bracelet that evening feels less like a strict diplomatic choice and more like a gentle, personal nod to his love and unwavering support. While the evenings in Ghana were defined by walls of diamonds, the daytime program required a very different kind of royal dressing. Elizabeth visited hospitals and schools, traveled through crowded streets in an open car, and explored places such as Accra's Makola Market, where she walked past fish stalls while Prince Philip paused to examine the local wares. For these engagements, the tiaras and heavy necklaces disappeared, and the familiar 3-strand pearls took their place. The Queen owned several pearl necklaces that looked remarkably similar, and identifying them from archival photographs can be surprisingly difficult. The two most easily confused are the necklace given to her by King George V in 1935 and the one she commissioned for herself in 1952. Jewelry expert Lauren Kina offers a useful way of telling them apart. The pearls in George V's gift are evenly sized, while the 1952 necklace is graduated, with slightly larger pearls at the center and smaller ones towards the back. That difference is not always visible in photographs, particularly in grainy press images taken from a distance. But in the Ghana pictures, where the necklace can be seen clearly enough, the graduation appears noticeable to me. I believe Elizabeth was wearing the 1952 necklace, the version she had commissioned at the beginning of her reign and would go on to wear more frequently than the others. The pearls created the constant note in her daytime wardrobe. Pinned to her daytime dresses were brooches carrying centuries of history, and her strategic choices began the very moment she landed. Stepping off the plane in Accra, she wore the Dorset bow brooch. Originally a wedding gift to her grandmother, Queen Mary, in 1893, it was later given to Elizabeth for her own wedding in 1947. She thoughtfully paired the brooch with the top pearl stud portion of the historic Duchess of Gloucester's pendant earrings, which was also a 1947 wedding gift to her. Relying on these classic, deeply personal pieces was a beautiful way to ground herself as she arrived in a tense and rapidly changing country. The very next day, for a massive military parade in Black Star Square, her jewelry shifted from personal to profoundly dynastic. She reached for Queen Adelaide's brooch. Commissioned back in 1831 by King William IV, this spectacular diamond clasp was actually created using diamonds dismantled from an old Order of the Bath badge that had belonged to King George III. It is one of the oldest heirlooms in the vault, earmarked to be worn exclusively by queens. Her wardrobe also included a pop of color. While riding in an open car with President Nkrumah to visit Kumasi University, she opted for the modern ruby and diamond spray brooch. The exact origins of this piece remain a bit of a mystery, but its mid-20th century design, featuring a slender row of rubies nestled among diamonds, added a vibrant, contemporary touch to her daytime look. For another daytime appearance in Ghana, the Queen chose 2 of the diamond roses from the Nizam of Hyderabad tiara, wearing them symmetrically on either side of her neckline. The roses had begun life as part of the extraordinary Cartier wedding gift selected by Princess Elizabeth in 1947. The Nizam allowed her to choose from Cartier's London stock, and she selected a floral tiara with 3 detachable roses together with a matching necklace. The roses could be removed from the tiara and worn separately from the beginning. Here, however, Elizabeth used 2 of them as a pair, allowing the matching Cartier motifs to frame the neckline of her dress. The arrangement feels very much in keeping with the fashion of the period, when matching brooches or clips were sometimes placed symmetrically on either side of a bodice. On November 13th, Elizabeth traveled north to a vast durbar in Tamale, wearing the Tech Emperor of Austria brooch. Its design is unusual. A plated diamond circle surrounds a pearl center, with Baroque pearl pendants suspended below. The jewel had been connected with the Tech family since 1870, when Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria acted as godfather to Prince Francis of Teck. Its later journey was considerably less orderly. Prince Francis, Queen Mary's younger brother and an inveterate gambler, left the jewel to his married mistress, the Countess of Kilmorey, when he died in 1910. On her death, the Countess bequeathed this particular piece to Princess Victoria, the daughter of Edward VII, allowing it to pass quietly back into the royal family. A few days later, on November 16th, another great diamond bow appeared at the Durbar in Kumasi. This time, Elizabeth wore Queen Mary's lover's knot brooch with a yellow dress and her usual pearls. Queen Mary had purchased the brooch from Gerard in 1932, and Elizabeth inherited it after her grandmother's death in 1953. This substantial, scalloped diamond bow was a beautiful way to carry her family's legacy with her throughout the trip. On November 19, for a morning service at Holy Trinity Church in Accra, Elizabeth chose a jewel with an even more extraordinary journey behind it: Empress Maria Fyodorovna's sapphire brooch. Women from the Guild of the Good Shepherd lined the path to the church, holding their ceremonial crooks, while the Queen arrived wearing a large cabochon sapphire encircled by 2 rows of diamonds with a pearl suspended beneath it. The brooch had been given to Princess Dagmar of Denmark in 1866 when she married the future Alexander III of Russia and became Maria Fyodorovna. The gift came from her sister and brother-in-law, the future Queen Alexandra and King Edward VII. Maria Fyodorovna wore it throughout her long life, and it was among the comparatively few jewels she retained after escaping revolutionary Russia. Following her death in 1928, her daughters, Grand Duchesses Xenia and Olga, sold a group of their mother's jewels to Queen Mary. This brooch entered Queen Mary's collection in 1930 and was later left to Elizabeth after Mary's death in 1953. Taken together, these daytime appearances reveal what I think was the real strength of Elizabeth's jewelry formula. The 3 strands of pearls remained almost constant, making her immediately recognizable, while the brooch altered the color, scale, and character of each outfit. The variety is more striking than it first appears. The modern ruby brooch brought a distinctly 20th century note. The Cartier roses belonged to Elizabeth's own wedding collection and were worn as a fashionable matching pair. The Dorset bow and lover's knot came through Queen Mary, while the Tech brooch had traveled out of the family through a rather awkward bequest before finding its way back. Maria Fyodorovna's sapphire had survived the collapse of an empire and crossed several branches of the family before reaching Elizabeth. Their collective effect is more convincing. The pearls gave the queen a stable public image, while the brooches allowed her to move between modern design, personal wedding gifts, and some of the most intricate histories in the royal collection. By evening, the scale of the jewels would change dramatically, but the underlying method remained much the same. Elizabeth relied on pieces she knew well, combined them with remarkable assurance, and allowed family history to sit quietly within the formal image of the monarch. For the diplomatic corps reception on the evening of November 11th, the Queen chose an ensemble built almost entirely from jewels associated with earlier queens. She wore Queen Mary's lover's knot tiara, created by Gerard in 1913 as a copy of an older Cambridge family piece. Its diamond knots and suspended pear-shaped pearls gave the tiara movement, while Queen Victoria's pearl drop earrings continued the same combination of diamonds and pearls. The principal necklace was the coronation necklace, made by Gerard for Queen Victoria in 1858. It was created after Victoria lost her legal claim to a group of jewels that passed to the King of Hanover, with diamonds taken from old swords and garter insignia used in the new necklace. Since then, it had been worn at successive coronations and had become one of the most formal necklaces available to a reigning queen. Its pendant is the Lahore diamond, weighing more than 22 carats. The stone had belonged to the Lahore treasury until the British annexation of the Punjab in 1849 and was presented to Queen Victoria in 1851. That provenance gives the necklace an imperial dimension that is difficult to overlook in retrospect, particularly when it was worn in Ghana only 4 years after independence. At the same time, I would be cautious about treating the diamond as the intended subject of the ensemble. The more immediate message came from the formality of the necklace itself. Elizabeth had selected one of the clearest visual markers of her position as sovereign for a reception with the diplomatic corps. Ghana was now an independent republic, but the occasion was being treated with the full ceremony and jewelry expected at the highest level of a royal tour. The necklace established that rank without requiring a more elaborate explanation. There was another Queen Mary jewel on the Queen's wrist, one of the diamond link bracelets. The history of this piece is particularly interesting because it had originally been designed as part of a convertible arrangement. Gerard created the first bracelet for Queen Mary in 1932 and a second in 1935. The two could be joined with a central diamond brooch to form a choker. That brooch contained a diamond of nearly 10 carats, presented to Queen Mary by the South African diamond industry in 1933. Queen Mary wore the complete choker during the 1930s, but Elizabeth used the components differently. She generally wore only one of the links as a bracelet and does not appear to have worn the two joined around her neck. Ghana, however, was not simply a setting in which British royal tradition could be displayed unchanged. The country had its own ceremonial language, ancient traditions, and a very recent experience of independence. Elizabeth's jewels established the rank she brought to the meeting. The next question is how Ghana expressed its own history and authority in return. The answer to the previous evening's display of British royal history came in Kumasi, the historic center of the Ashanti region, where Elizabeth and Philip attended a vast durbar led by the Asantehene, Sir Osei Agyemang Prempeh II. Around 150 chiefs gathered for the occasion, wearing brightly colored kente cloth and seated beneath large ceremonial umbrellas. Gold appeared everywhere, in the regalia of the chiefs, on ceremonial swords, and in the objects carried by their attendants. Ghana was presenting the royal visitors with a tradition of authority that was entirely its own. Elizabeth's jewelry was comparatively restrained. She wore her familiar 3 strands of pearls and Queen Mary's lover's knot brooch with a yellow dress. We have already seen how substantial this brooch is, with its diamond ribbons, central knot, and articulated tails. Among the objects brought out for the durbar was the golden stool, the most important emblem of Ashanti unity and authority. Western reports sometimes described it rather loosely as a stool made from solid gold. In fact, it is a carved wooden object covered with gold, and no one is permitted to sit upon it. Its importance lies in what it represents, rather than in the value of the material alone. According to their beliefs, it holds the very soul, spirit, and absolute essence of the entire Ashanti nation. The fact that it was brought out to receive the royal couple was a mark of immense respect and trust. Both sides had displayed their greatness, wrapping their diplomacy in their most sacred symbols and jewels. On November 18th, the royal visit culminated in a magnificent farewell ball at the State House in Accra. For this highly anticipated final evening, Elizabeth needed an unforgettable look. She stepped out wearing what I considered to be one of the most breathtaking and historically complex combinations in the royal vaults. The Vladimir tiara, fitted with its magnificent emerald drops, paired seamlessly with the spectacular Delhi Durbar parure. When you look closely at this specific combination, you realize she wasn't just wearing beautiful gems. She had chosen to wear the most dramatic, scandalous, and cinematic survival stories of the entire royal collection. Let's start with the tiara itself. The Vladimir tiara has a backstory that honestly sounds like a Hollywood script. It was originally crafted around 1874 for the glamorous Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna of Russia. When the Russian Revolution erupted in 1917, the Grand Duchess was forced to flee St. Petersburg, leaving her fabulous jewels locked in a secret safe in her bedroom at the Vladimir Palace. Enter Bertie Stopford, an aristocratic British art dealer and a friend of her son. In the summer of 1917, disguised in workman's clothes, Stopford sneaked into the palace, emptied the secret safe, and smuggled the glittering contents out of Russia in a pair of ordinary, unassuming Gladstone bags. The tiara eventually made its way to a safety deposit box in London, and in 1921, Queen Mary purchased the damaged piece from the Grand Duchess's daughter and had it carefully repaired by Gerard. But the tiara had a little secret of its own on this particular night. The original Russian design featured pearl drops, but Queen Mary had it cleverly adapted in 1924 so that the pearls could be swapped out for 15 stunning cabochon emeralds. And the origin of those green stones? It is just as wild as the tiara's escape. They are part of the famous Cambridge emeralds. Believe it or not, these exquisite gems were actually won in a state-sponsored charity lottery in Frankfurt in 1818 by Princess Augusta, the Duchess of Cambridge. The emeralds were passed down through the family until they were inherited by Prince Francis of Teck. He, being a rather wayward character, infamously bequeathed these priceless family jewels to his married mistress, the Countess of Kilmorey, when he died in 1910. His sister, Queen Mary, was absolutely horrified by the indiscretion. She swiftly tracked down the Countess and quietly bought the family jewels back for £10,000, ensuring they returned to the royal vaults. Those rescued Cambridge emeralds didn't just end up as drops for the tiara. Queen Mary used the bulk of them to create an entire suite of jewelry for one of the most extravagant events in imperial history, the Delhi Durbar of 1911, which celebrated her and King George V as Empress and Emperor of India. The Queen wore the complete set that night in Ghana. The necklace alone is a masterpiece of historical weight. It features 9 of those large Cambridge emeralds and 6 massive diamonds, but the true focal point is suspended right at the center, the spectacular Cullinan 7 diamond, weighing an astonishing 8.8 carats. To complete the ensemble, she wore the matching emerald and diamond earrings, as well as the coordinating bracelet, bringing the full weight of the parure together. And so, we arrive at the absolute peak of the entire visit, the exact moment that made headlines around the world and has been talked about for decades. Dressed in a beautiful, elegant white evening gown that perfectly framed her historic emeralds, Elizabeth stepped onto the parquet with President Nkrumah. The band struck up a lively, infectious tune, a traditional Ghanaian highlife piece composed specifically for the occasion, aptly titled, "Welcome Your Majesty," and the two began to dance. When you zoom out and look at the world in 1961, the power of this single action is breathtaking. This was an era when harsh racial segregation was still fiercely enforced in many parts of the world, and apartheid was deeply rooted in South Africa. The sight of a white European monarch and a black African president laughing, holding hands, and dancing together as equals flashed across global newspapers like a bolt of lightning. I absolutely love how the Ghanaian historian Nat Nunu Amartefio described the unique power of this moment. He pointed out something so insightful, noting, "A man could not have done it." He explained how deeply meaningful it was to see their president respected enough by the Queen of England for her to literally put her arms around him and dance. It was a profound gesture of validation and equality that resonated far beyond the walls of the State House in Accra. If you have watched the Netflix series The Crown, you almost certainly remember this exact scene. Over the years, pop culture has built a rather neat, almost fairy tale myth around this moment on the dance floor. The popular legend, and the television show, portrays this dance as a magical, desperate move that instantly charmed Nkrumah, single-handedly saved Ghana from the Soviet bloc, and fixed all political tensions overnight. But history is rarely ever quite so simple, is it? The reality is that one single dance doesn't magically rewrite global politics or instantly sever international alliances. However, to dismiss the moment just because it didn't solve the Cold War on the spot would be to entirely miss its true brilliance. What Elizabeth achieved that night was the ultimate victory of royal soft power. She swept away the icy, bomb-threatened tensions of the previous weeks, replacing them with a genuinely warm, cooperative atmosphere. Most importantly, her presence and her grace essentially secured Ghana's continued place within the Commonwealth, right at a moment when its departure felt almost inevitable. Looking back at that evening from our modern vantage point, we can see the quiet brilliance of her strategy. By simply stepping onto that dance floor in her imperial diamonds, the sovereign acknowledged that the old, rigid rules of empire were fading into the past. This new, post-colonial era demanded something different. It required mutual respect and a willingness to communicate as equals, moving together to an entirely new rhythm. The 1961 royal tour to Ghana proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Queen Elizabeth II was never merely a passive figurehead moved across a political chessboard. She navigated a deeply volatile landscape with absolute fearlessness, using the contents of her jewelry box as a masterclass in soft power. In a rapidly and unpredictably changing world, those silent, sparkling witnesses, the graduated pearls, the historic brooches, the monumental diamond walls, spoke volumes. They broadcast an unmistakable message of stability, mutual respect, and the enduring steadfastness of the British monarchy. This story is actually the very first episode in a new series I am planning for the channel, exploring major historical events and state visits through the fascinating lens of royal jewelry. I won't reveal our next destinations just yet, but I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Do you enjoy this kind of historical deep dive? And are there any specific royal tours, banquets, or historic moments you'd like us to decode next? Please share your suggestions in the comments below. If you want to make sure you don't miss the upcoming episodes in this series, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you very soon.